Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Awakening. Roy Vaughn had built his empire on precision and control. At 38, he owned 3 successful construction companies across Texas, commanded respect in every boardroom he entered, and possessed the kind of calculating intelligence that made lesser men uncomfortable. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his reputation for decisive action preceded him wherever he went. The Vaughn household in affluent Highland Park reflected his success, a sprawling colonial with manicured grounds where his wife, Cindy Barrett Vaughn, played the perfect suburban mother to their 6-month-old son, Mason. Roy had married Cindy 5 years ago, drawn to her stunning beauty and seemingly innocent charm. She was 28 now, with cascading blonde hair and emerald eyes that had captivated him during their whirlwind courtship. Roy's business partner and closest friend, Gabriel Bond, was practically family. The two men had served together in the Marines before starting their construction empire. Gabriel, 35 with dark hair and an easy smile, was Mason's godfather and frequent dinner guest. Roy trusted him implicitly, a trust that would soon prove catastrophic. That Tuesday evening in October, Roy was reviewing contracts in his home office when his phone exploded with calls. His assistant's frantic voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Vaughn, there's been an emergency at your house. Paramedics." Roy's blood turned to ice as he raced home, his mind rejecting the possibilities. He burst through his front door to find chaos. Emergency vehicles, neighbors gathered on his lawn, and his wife, Cindy, sobbing hysterically in the arms of Gabriel. "I came home to find paramedics in my living room and my mother crying," Roy would later recount to investigators, though Cindy's mother wasn't present that day. The EMT, a seasoned professional named Craig Macias, approached him with grave eyes. "Your son stopped breathing. I found him blue and lifeless in his crib," the EMT explained, his voice clinical yet compassionate. "Possible SIDS, but we revived him. He's stable now, but we need to get him to Children's Medical Center immediately." Roy's world tilted. His son, his perfect, healthy baby boy, had nearly died. As the ambulance screamed toward the hospital, Roy held Cindy's trembling hand while Gabriel followed his car. None of them spoke during that terrifying journey. At the hospital, the pediatrician, Dr. Ellen Heath, pulled Roy aside after Mason was stabilized. Her expression was troubled, professional mask slipping slightly. "Sir, your baby was given a respiratory suppressant. We need to know who was alone with him because the timing suggests this wasn't accidental." The words hit Roy like physical blows. Someone had deliberately poisoned his infant son. His mind immediately cataloged the day's events. He'd left for work at 7 a.m. Cindy had been home with the baby, and Gabriel had mentioned stopping by during lunch to drop off some documents. Roy's hands clenched into fists as the implications crystallized. His wife had been acting strangely for weeks. Secretive phone calls, unexplained absences, a new wardrobe that seemed designed to impress someone. Gabriel had been overly attentive lately, always finding excuses to visit, always ready with a comforting hand when Cindy seemed stressed. "Who had access to the baby today?" Dr. Heath pressed gently. Roy's voice was barely controlled when he answered. "My wife and my business partner." They were both alone with Mason at different times. As he stood in that sterile hospital corridor, watching his son fight for life through the NICU window, Roy Vaughn felt something fundamental shift inside him. The man who had always prided himself on loyalty and trust realized he'd been played for a fool. But unlike the broken husbands in countless stories of betrayal, Roy wouldn't crumble or forgive. He would destroy them both. Chapter 2, The Investigation. Roy spent the next 3 days at Mason's bedside, maintaining the facade of a concerned father while his mind worked with cold precision. The toxicology reports confirmed traces of a powerful respiratory depressant, something that required medical knowledge to obtain and administer. Gabriel had been a combat medic in the Marines. The knowledge hit Roy like a sledgehammer. While Cindy fretted and played the devastated mother for the hospital staff, Roy began his investigation. Years of military training and business dealings had taught him patience and thoroughness. He would gather evidence methodically before striking. The first crack appeared when Roy accessed their home security system remotely. The footage from that Tuesday revealed Gabriel arriving at 11:30 a.m., 30 minutes earlier than he'd claimed. More damning was the timestamp showing him leaving Cindy's bedroom at 12:45 p.m., adjusting his clothes and hair. Roy's jaw tightened as he watched his wife emerge 15 minutes later, smoothing down her dress with a satisfied smile that made his blood boil. They'd been having an affair under his roof, around his child. But the real revelation came when Roy hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Scott Stout. Within 48 hours, Scott delivered a comprehensive report that painted a picture of systematic betrayal spanning 8 months. They've been meeting at the Marriott downtown twice a week, Scott reported in Roy's office Friday morning. Credit card records show Gabriel's been paying for the rooms. But here's the interesting part. Your wife's been researching life insurance policies and custody laws. Roy's expression remained impassive, but inside, rage built like pressure in a boiler. Continue. She's also been in contact with a divorce attorney, Jackie Bradshaw. Preliminary consultation last month. And get this, Gabriel's been liquidating assets. Sold his boat, cashed in some investments. Looks like they're planning to run. The final piece came from hospital security footage that Scott obtained through contacts. It showed Gabriel entering the NICU area during visiting hours earlier that week, wearing scrubs he had no authorization to possess. He'd been casing the hospital, learning routines, understanding how to navigate medical facilities. Roy leaned back in his leather chair, his mind assembling the full picture. They hadn't just betrayed him, they'd tried to murder his son. The motive became clear, with Mason dead and Roy potentially blamed or devastated by grief. Cindy could divorce him, take half his assets, and disappear with Gabriel. But they'd made one critical error. They'd underestimated Roy Vaughn. "Scott," Roy said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that made the investigator straighten. "I need you to dig deeper. I want to know everything about their families, their friends, their finances. Every weakness, every vulnerability. And I need it done quietly. How deep do you want me to go, Mr. Vaughn?" Roy's smile was arctic. "All the way to hell, if necessary. They tried to kill my son. Now I'm going to kill everything they care about." That evening, Roy returned home to find Cindy preparing dinner, playing the role of concerned wife. Gabriel sat at the kitchen table, holding Mason with what appeared to be genuine affection. "How's the little fighter doing?" Roy asked, accepting his son from Gabriel's arms. The baby gurgled happily, unaware of the deadly game being played around him. "The doctors say he's completely recovered," Cindy said, her performance flawless. "Thank God Gabriel was here that day. He knew exactly what to do." Gabriel nodded modestly. "Just glad I could help. Mason's like my own nephew." Roy smiled warmly at both of them, even as he planned their destruction. "We're so lucky to have friends like you, Gabriel. Family means everything." The irony was exquisite. They thought they'd succeeded in deceiving him, but Roy had always been the superior strategist. Now he would show them what true ruthlessness looked like. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. Over the next 2 weeks, Roy maintained his facade while assembling his instruments of revenge. His investigation had revealed vulnerabilities in both Cindy and Gabriel that he intended to exploit without mercy. Cindy's weakness was her family, specifically her younger sister Jerry Barrett Willis, a struggling single mother of 2 in Oklahoma. Jerry worked as a bank teller and barely made ends meet, often calling Cindy for financial help that Roy had unknowingly provided. Through Scott Stout, Roy discovered that Jerry had been skimming small amounts from customer accounts to pay for her diabetic daughter's insulin, a crime that could send her to prison for years. Gabriel's vulnerability was more personal. His ex-wife Lynn Bond Moore lived in California with their teenage son Charlie Bond. Gabriel sent substantial support payments and desperately wanted visitation rights that Lynn frequently denied. What Gabriel didn't know was that Lynn had been documenting every missed visit, every late payment, building a case to terminate his parental rights permanently. Roy also uncovered Gabriel's massive gambling debts, nearly $200,000 owed to some very dangerous people in Dallas's underground betting scene. Gabriel had been using company funds to make minimum payments, a fact Roy had deliberately overlooked to maintain their partnership. Now it would become a weapon. The construction business provided Roy with additional assets. His company employed several men with checkered pasts, ex-convicts grateful for second chances who owed their livelihoods to Roy's generosity. Men like Rudy Ellison, a former enforcer who'd served 8 years for assault, and Todd Long, whose expertise with explosives had been acquired through less than legal means. Roy's plan began to crystallize during a family dinner that included Gabriel and the Vaughn's neighbors, Emmanuel Simon and his wife Cara Ward Simon. Emmanuel was a pharmaceutical executive with access to various medications, while Cara worked in the county clerk's office with intimate knowledge of legal proceedings. Roy mused over dessert. I've been thinking about expanding the business. Maybe bringing in some new partners, restructuring things. Gabriel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Restructuring how? Oh, just making sure everyone's protected. Insurance policies, legal safeguards. You never know what could happen. Roy's smile was genuine warmth masking deadly intent. Family has to come first. Cindy squeezed his hand affectionately. You're such a good provider, Roy. Mason and I are so lucky. Lucky, Roy repeated, the word tasting like ash. Yes, we're all very lucky. After their guests left, Roy retreated to his study and began making calls. The first was to Aaron Daly, a former military colleague who now worked in private security. Aaron, I need a favor. Remember those contacts you maintained in various unofficial capacities? Always happy to help a brother in arms, Roy. What kind of assistance are we talking about? The kind that requires absolute discretion and flexible moral boundaries. Aaron's chuckle was dark. My favorite kind. When do we start? The second call went to his attorney, Herbert McKinney, a man whose ethics were as flexible as his fees were exorbitant. Herbert, I need you to draft some documents. Partnership dissolution agreements, custody papers, insurance policy adjustments. And I need them all to be ironclad and immediately enforceable. Planning some changes, Roy? You could say that. I'm cleaning house. The final call was to Brian Williamson, a contact in the pharmaceutical industry who specialized in substances that were difficult to trace and impossible to treat. Roy Vaughn, I have a business proposition that requires your particular expertise. I'm listening. I need something that causes intense, prolonged suffering without permanent physical damage. Something that would make death seem preferable, but keep the subject alive to experience every moment. There was a pause. That's a very specific request. I'm a very specific man. Can you deliver? For the right price, I can't deliver anything. Roy hung up and poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, staring out at his property where security lights illuminated perfectly manicured grounds. Somewhere in the house, his wife slept peacefully, probably dreaming of her escape with Gabriel. His son rested safely in the nursery, unaware that his father was planning a war. Roy had always believed in Old Testament justice, an eye for an eye. They'd try to take his son's life and destroy his family. Now he would take everything they had, everyone they loved, and leave them with nothing but pain and regret. The gathering storm was about to break, and Roy Vaughn intended to be the lightning that destroyed his enemies completely. Chapter 4: The Web Titans. Roy's plan entered its execution phase on a crisp November morning. He'd spent 3 weeks weaving an intricate web of surveillance, manipulation, and carefully planted evidence. Now it was time to begin pulling the strings. The first move targeted Cindy's sister Jerry. Roy had Aaron Daly plant evidence of her embezzlement in ways that would be discovered during a routine audit. Then he had Scott Stout anonymously tip off federal investigators about irregularities at her bank branch. Within hours, FBI agents were at Jerry's door. Roy watched through surveillance feeds as his sister-in-law was arrested, her children screaming as she was handcuffed and led away. The local news picked up the story, local bank teller charged with federal fraud. When Cindy saw the report that evening, she collapsed into Roy's arms, sobbing. Oh God, Roy, Jerry's been arrested. They're saying she stole money. Roy held her close, stroking her hair with practiced comfort. I'm so sorry, honey. We'll get her the best lawyer money can buy. Family takes care of family. What Cindy didn't know was that Roy had already contacted Jerry's court-appointed attorney and made it clear that any assistance from the Vaughn family would be contingent on Jerry providing detailed information about Cindy's recent behavior, phone calls, and private conversations. Desperate to protect her children, Jerry would soon become an unwitting asset in Roy's campaign. The second phase targeted Gabriel's financial vulnerabilities. Roy arranged for his gambling debts to be called in immediately, all $200,000 worth. Through intermediaries, he'd purchased Gabriel's markers from various bookmakers, consolidating the debt under his own shadow companies. Gabriel received a visit from Rudy Ellison and two other intimidating men who explained that the payment schedule had been accelerated and that failure to pay within 48 hours would result in severe physical consequences. When Gabriel frantically called Roy for a company loan, Roy was ready. "Jesus, Roy, I'm in serious trouble. Some guys I owe money to are making threats. I need 200 grand, just temporarily." Roy's voice was concerned, helpful. "That's a lot of money, Gabriel. What kind of trouble are we talking about?" "Gambling debts. I know I screwed up, but these aren't the kind of people you can negotiate with." "Gambling debts? Gabriel, that's illegal in Texas. If this comes out, it could destroy our business licenses, our reputation." Roy paused dramatically. "But your family. I'll figure something out." The hook was set. Roy agreed to loan Gabriel the money, but required full financial disclosure and temporary signing authority over Gabriel's personal accounts for legal protection. Gabriel, desperate and grateful, signed everything without reading the fine print. Meanwhile, Roy escalated his surveillance operation. He had Todd Long install virtually undetectable cameras throughout Gabriel's apartment, and Aaron Daly place tracking devices on both Gabriel's and Cindy's vehicles. Every movement, every conversation, every intimate moment was now being recorded. The evidence Roy gathered was damning beyond his original suspicions. Cindy and Gabriel weren't just having an affair. They were planning Roy's complete destruction. Hidden cameras caught them discussing how to trigger a mental breakdown that would allow Cindy to have Roy committed, gaining control of his assets while Gabriel managed the business. "He's so stressed about Mason," Cindy said during one recorded session. "If something else happened, maybe another accident, it might push him over the edge." Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. PTSD from his military service, business pressure, family trauma. "We could make a compelling case for involuntary commitment. And then we'd be free," Cindy whispered, kissing him passionately. Roy watched the footage with ice-cold fury. They weren't just betraying him. They were planning to steal his sanity, his freedom, and his son. The attempted murder of Mason hadn't been about insurance money or custody arrangements. It had been a psychological weapon designed to destabilize Roy's mental state. But they'd miscalculated completely. Roy wasn't breaking down. He was building up an arsenal of destruction that would annihilate them both. The third phase involved Roy's pharmaceutical contact, Brian Williamson. The substance Roy had requested was a designer compound that caused intense anxiety, paranoia, and physical discomfort without leaving traceable evidence. Small doses administered over time would create symptoms that mimicked severe mental illness. Roy began adding the compound to Gabriel's coffee during their daily business meetings. Within days, Gabriel was experiencing panic attacks, insomnia, and growing paranoia that his gambling creditors were watching him constantly. "I keep seeing the same car following me," Gabriel confided to Roy during a particularly stressful afternoon. "And I've been having these episodes. Racing heart, can't breathe, feeling like something terrible is about to happen." Roy nodded sympathetically while adjusting Gabriel's coffee cup. "Sounds like anxiety. Maybe you should see a doctor. Stress can really mess with your head." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on Roy. Gabriel was experiencing exactly the psychological breakdown he'd planned to inflict on his victim. By the end of November, Roy's enemies were trapped in a web of their own making. Cindy was emotionally devastated by her sister's arrest and legal troubles. Gabriel was physically and mentally deteriorating while drowning in debt and paranoia. And both remained completely unaware that their intended victim was orchestrating their destruction with ruthless precision. Roy stood in his study that night, reviewing surveillance footage and financial records, planning the next phase of his campaign. The baby monitor on his desk crackled softly with Mason's peaceful breathing, a constant reminder of what these people had tried to take from him. They wanted to destroy his family and steal his life. Now Roy would show them what real destruction looked like. Chapter 5. The News Titans. December brought the first major confrontation as Roy's psychological warfare reached critical mass. Gabriel was now barely functional, jumping at shadows and making increasingly erratic decisions that jeopardized their business operations. Cindy was spending most of her time on the phone with lawyers trying to help her sister, leaving Mason in Roy's care more frequently, exactly as he'd planned. The brilliance of Roy's strategy lay in its subtlety. To outside observers, he appeared to be the stable, supportive husband holding his family together during multiple crises. When Gabriel's work performance declined, Roy covered for him publicly while documenting every failure privately. When Cindy needed time to handle Jerry's legal problems, Roy graciously adjusted his schedule to care for Mason, earning sympathy from friends and neighbors. Roy's been amazing through all this, Cindy told her friend Christy Atkins during a recorded phone conversation. I don't know what I'd do without him. Roy smiled coldly as he listened to the playback. His wife's genuine appreciation for his support while she planned his destruction added another layer of satisfaction to his revenge. The next phase involved exploiting Gabriel's deteriorating mental state. Roy arranged for Emmanuel Simon to casually mention during a dinner party that he'd seen Gabriel's car outside a known gambling establishment. Information that was technically true since Roy had Aaron Daly park it there, while Gabriel was unconscious from an especially strong dose of the anxiety compound. I'm worried about Gabriel, Emmanuel told the group, including several mutual friends. I've seen him at some pretty questionable places lately. The gossip spread quickly through their social circle. Gabriel found himself excluded from social gatherings and business opportunities as word of his gambling problem circulated. His increasing paranoia and erratic behavior only reinforced the narrative Roy was carefully constructing. Meanwhile, Roy began the delicate process of separating Gabriel from the company. Using Gabriel's signed financial agreements, Roy had legal authority to make business decisions during Gabriel's mental health crisis. He systematically transferred Gabriel's shares to a trust controlled by Roy, liquidated Gabriel's assets to pay gambling debts, and moved key accounts to new managers. When Gabriel finally realized what was happening, he was too deeply compromised to fight back effectively. Roy, what the hell is going on with my accounts? Gabriel demanded during a confrontation in Roy's office. His hands shook from withdrawal-like symptoms caused by the compound, and dark circles under his eyes made him look haggard and desperate. Roy maintained perfect composure. I'm following the agreements you signed, Gabriel. Your gambling debts were creating legal liability for the company. I had to protect our business. Those debts were private. You had no right. I had every right. You signed financial disclosure agreements and gave me temporary authority. Everything I've done is completely legal. Roy's voice was reasonable, concerned. Gabriel, you're not thinking clearly. Maybe you should consider getting professional help. Gabriel's paranoia spiked. You're trying to steal the company. You're destroying my life. I'm trying to save your life, Roy replied calmly. Look at yourself, man. When's the last time you slept? When did you last eat a full meal? You're having a breakdown. The conversation was being recorded, of course. Gabriel's increasingly aggressive behavior would provide perfect evidence for any future legal proceedings about his mental instability and unfitness for business partnership. But Roy's masterpiece was the trap he prepared for Cindy. Using information extracted from her sister Jerry, Roy knew about Cindy's secret bank account in the Cayman Islands. Money she'd been siphoning from household expenses for months to fund her escape with Gabriel. Roy had Brian Williamson create a special compound that would cause temporary but severe food poisoning symptoms. On the night of December 15th, Roy slipped the substance into Cindy's wine during dinner, then left for an emergency business meeting that would provide him with an alibi. While Cindy suffered through what appeared to be violent food poisoning, Roy was burglarizing their own home, specifically Cindy's private office. He photographed documents, copied computer files, and planted additional evidence of her affair and financial theft. Most importantly, he accessed her secret communication devices and discovered the full extent of their plot against him. The text messages were beyond damning. Cindy to Gabriel, "R is getting suspicious. We need to move faster." Gabriel to Cindy, "Baby incident should have worked. Maybe we need something more direct." Cindy to Gabriel, "Can't risk anything that traces back to us. Mental breakdown plan is safer." Gabriel to Cindy, "What about Mason? He complicates things." Cindy to Gabriel, "Kids adapt. He'll never remember his father anyway." That final message sealed their fate. They weren't just planning to destroy Roy. They were discussing casualty, dismissing the impact on his infant son. Any lingering doubt about the necessity of his revenge evaporated completely. Roy photographed everything, copied all digital communications, and left Cindy to suffer through her illness alone. When he returned home, he played the concerned husband perfectly, caring for Mason while Cindy recovered. "I'm so sorry I had to leave," he said, bringing her tea and medicine. "How are you feeling?" "Horrible," Cindy whispered weakly. "It came on so suddenly. Food poisoning can be brutal. Just rest. I've got everything under control." The irony was exquisite. Cindy was accepting comfort from the man she'd tried to destroy, never knowing he'd engineered her suffering as a distraction for gathering evidence that would annihilate her completely. By Christmas Eve, Roy had assembled a comprehensive dossier on both targets. Gabriel was financially ruined, professionally discredited, and psychologically shattered. Cindy was under federal investigation for financial crimes related to her sister's case and facing imminent exposure of her affair and theft. But Roy wasn't finished. The final phase would be the most brutal, leaving both of them alive but destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. They'd try to take everything from him, including his son's life. Now Roy would show them what a truly ruthless man could accomplish when he had nothing left to lose. Chapter 6: The Trap Springs. New Year's Eve arrived with bitter cold and the promise of reckoning. Roy had spent the holiday week making final preparations for the culmination of his revenge. Every piece was in position, every contingency planned, every weakness mapped and ready for exploitation. The setting for his grand finale was perfect, their annual New Year's Eve party at the Vaughn Mansion. Roy had invited their entire social circle, including business associates, neighbors, and family friends. Gabriel would be there, despite his deteriorating condition, because Roy had specifically insisted his best friend shouldn't miss their traditional celebration. What the guests didn't know was that they were about to witness the complete destruction of two lives. Roy had spent days preparing the house like a theater set. Hidden cameras captured every angle. Recording devices were placed strategically throughout the main rooms, and Aaron Daly's team was positioned as catering staff to ensure security and documentation of the evening's events. The first guests arrived at 7 p.m. Gabriel appeared shortly after, looking gaunt and nervous, his eyes darting constantly as if expecting attack. The anxiety compound had done its work perfectly. He was a shadow of his former confident self, jumping at sudden sounds and struggling to maintain basic conversations. Cindy played hostess with practiced grace, but Roy noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She was under enormous stress from her sister's legal troubles and the increasing scrutiny of her own finances. The federal investigation into Jerry's case had expanded to examine family financial connections, putting Cindy's secret accounts at risk of discovery. At 8:30, Roy called for everyone's attention in the main living room. The crowd gathered expectantly, champagne glasses in hand, assuming he was about to make his traditional New Year's toast. Instead, Roy pulled out a tablet and began displaying images on the large wall-mounted screen. "Before we celebrate the new year," Roy said, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "I thought we should reflect on the year behind us. Specifically, some discoveries I've made about trust, loyalty, and family." The first image was a photograph of Gabriel and Cindy in bed together, taken through hidden cameras in Gabriel's apartment. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the implications registered. Cindy went white as paper. "Roy, what are you?" "Please, darling, let me finish." Roy's tone was conversational, almost gentle. You see, 8 months ago, my wife and my best friend began an affair. Not just a physical relationship, but a conspiracy to destroy my life and steal everything I've built. Gabriel tried to move toward the door, but found his path blocked by Aaron Daly, now clearly revealed as security rather than catering staff. The images continued. Bank records showing Cindy's theft, text messages discussing Roy's planned commitment to a mental institution, medical reports about the respiratory suppressant found in Mason's system. They tried to murder my 6-month-old son, Roy continued, his voice never wavering. The plan was to drive me insane with grief and guilt, have me committed for psychiatric treatment, then take control of my assets and my child. The room was silent, except for someone's sharp intake of breath. Their friends and neighbors stared in shock at the unfolding revelations. But here's what they didn't know, Roy said, advancing to the next slide. I've been aware of their conspiracy for weeks, and I've spent that time preparing my response. The screen showed Gabriel's financial ruin, the called gambling debts, the liquidated assets, the transferred business shares. Then Cindy's situation, the frozen bank accounts, the evidence of her theft, the federal warrants that would be served within hours. Gabriel Bond, you're finished, Roy said matter-of-factly. Your business partnership is dissolved, your assets are seized for debt payment, and your ex-wife has been provided with evidence of your gambling addiction and conspiracy to commit murder. You'll never see your son again. Gabriel's legs gave out. He collapsed into a chair, the full scope of his destruction finally clear. Cindy Barrett-Vaughn, Roy continued, turning to his wife, you've been under federal investigation for financial crimes connected to your sister's case. The evidence I've provided to investigators shows systematic theft from our joint accounts and conspiracy to commit fraud. You're facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Roy paused, letting the information sink in. But that's not the worst part. He activated a different file, custody documents, already signed by a judge. I've been granted emergency custody of Mason based on evidence of your attempt to murder him. A family court judge has reviewed recordings of your conversations with Gabriel, including your discussion of how Mason will never remember his father anyway. You've lost your son forever. Cindy screamed, a raw, animalistic sound of complete anguish. She lunged at Roy, but Aaron's team restrained her quickly and professionally. How could you do this to us? Gabriel gasped, his voice broken. We were family. Roy's expression became arctic. You tried to murder my child. You planned to steal my life and destroy my sanity. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? He gestured to the security team. Remove them. Both of them. As Gabriel and Cindy were escorted from the house, she still screaming threats and curses, he broken and silent. Roy turned back to his stunned guests. I apologize for the unpleasant revelation, he said calmly. But I believe in transparency. Now, shall we toast the new year? The party ended quickly after that, guests making hurried excuses and leaving with shocked expressions. Roy didn't care. He'd achieved his primary objective, the complete and public destruction of his enemies. Later that night, as federal agents arrested Cindy at a motel where she'd fled, and Gabriel was found in his apartment in a catatonic state requiring psychiatric intervention, Roy sat in his study, holding his sleeping son. They'd try to take everything from him. Instead, they'd lost everything themselves. Justice, Roy reflected, could be beautiful when properly executed. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The new year brought swift and merciless justice as Roy's carefully constructed trap yielded its intended consequences. Within 72 hours of the New Year's Eve revelation, both Cindy and Gabriel were in custody. She facing federal charges, he committed for psychiatric evaluation after a complete mental breakdown. The media coverage was extensive and devastating. Highland Park power couple's marriage destroyed by murder plot, read the Dallas Morning News headline. Local television stations ran footage from the party, showing the moment Roy exposed the conspiracy to their social circle. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, attempted infanticide, and ruthless revenge. Roy emerged from the scandal as a sympathetic figure. Public opinion painted him as a devoted father who'd uncovered his family's plot against his innocent child. His measured response to betrayal was seen as justified, even admirable. Business associates rallied around him, viewing his methodical destruction of the conspirators as evidence of his strength and strategic thinking. Gabriel's breakdown was total and irreversible. The anxiety compound, combined with the psychological trauma of his complete ruin, had triggered a genuine psychiatric collapse. He was found in his apartment 3 days after the party, catatonic and unresponsive, surrounded by evidence of his paranoid delusions scratched into the walls. Dr. Ellen Heath, the pediatrician who'd first identified Mason's poisoning, provided expert testimony about Gabriel's medical knowledge and access to respiratory suppressants. His military medic training made him the only person with both opportunity and expertise to attempt the murder. Mr. Bond would have known exactly how to administer a non-lethal but dangerous dose, Dr. Heath testified during the custody hearing. The precision of the dosage suggests someone with medical training who wanted to create a life-threatening emergency without actually killing the child. Gabriel's ex-wife, Lynn Moore, testified about his gambling addiction and erratic behavior, providing documentation of missed support payments and her fears about his mental instability. With Roy's evidence of the conspiracy, the judge terminated Gabriel's parental rights permanently and issued a restraining order preventing any contact with his son. Confined to a psychiatric facility and facing multiple felony charges, Gabriel's life was effectively over. The facility's psychiatrist reported that he spent most days staring at walls, occasionally mumbling about the man who destroyed everything, but showing no recognition of his own culpability. Cindy's situation was equally dire, but more complex. The federal investigation had expanded beyond her sister's embezzlement to examine the Vaughn family's finances comprehensively. Roy's evidence revealed years of systematic theft from their joint accounts, with Cindy siphoning funds to the Cayman Islands account while planning her escape. The conspiracy charges were devastating. Recorded conversations showed clear intent to commit fraud, murder, and psychological torture. Cindy's dismissive comment about Mason adapting to his father's absence became crucial evidence of her callous disregard for the child's welfare. Her sister Jerry, facing her own federal charges, provided additional testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. She revealed Cindy's long-standing resentment of Roy's control over their finances and her desire to make him pay for treating her like property. Cindy always said Roy thought he owned her, Jerry testified. She wanted to take everything from him the way she felt he'd taken her freedom. The irony wasn't lost on Roy. Cindy had viewed his financial success and protective instincts as oppression, never recognizing that her privileged lifestyle came at the cost of his hard work and sacrifice. Now she faced decades in federal prison while he retained everything she tried to steal. The custody hearing was a formality. Roy's evidence was overwhelming. Recordings of Cindy discussing Mason's disposal, financial records showing her theft, and medical testimony about the attempted murder. The judge awarded him sole custody with no visitation rights for Cindy. Mrs. Vaughn has demonstrated complete disregard for her child's safety and well-being, the judge stated. Her participation in a conspiracy to murder the child eliminates any possibility of maintaining a parental relationship. Roy's business empire actually strengthened during the scandal. Clients viewed his methodical response to betrayal as evidence of his reliability and strategic thinking. His construction companies won several major contracts from executives who respected his handling of the situation. Roy Vaughn is a man you can trust, commented Dwayne Ryan, CEO of a major development firm. When his own family betrayed him, he didn't break down or lash out emotionally. He gathered evidence, built a case, and executed justice. That's the kind of strategic thinking we want in our business. The pharmaceutical compound Roy had used remained undetectable in Gabriel's system, metabolizing completely within weeks. Brian Williamson had designed it specifically to avoid long-term health consequences while creating temporary psychological vulnerability. Gabriel's breakdown appeared to be purely stress-related, triggered by the exposure of his crimes and the destruction of his life. By March, both conspirators were serving their sentences. Cindy received 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Gabriel was sentenced to 15 years, but would serve the time in a psychiatric prison facility due to his mental condition. Roy's victory was complete and permanent. He'd eliminated the threats to his family, retained his wealth and business empire, and gained sole custody of his son. The people who tried to destroy him were now destroyed themselves, facing decades of imprisonment while he moved forward stronger than before. But Roy's revenge hadn't ended with imprisonment. The final phase would ensure that his enemies' suffering continued long after their trials concluded. Chapter 8: The Long Game. Roy's revenge extended far beyond the courtroom victories. While Cindy and Gabriel served their sentences, he continued orchestrating their destruction with methodical precision. They tried to take everything from him. Now he would ensure they never recovered from their fall. The first target was their support systems. Gabriel's remaining family had largely abandoned him after the trial, but his elderly mother, Belinda Bond, continued visiting the psychiatric facility and maintaining his legal defense fund. Roy systematically destroyed even this final connection. Through Scott Stout's continued surveillance, Roy discovered that Belinda was struggling with medical bills from her own cancer treatment. Her insurance had been denied for an experimental therapy that could extend her life significantly. Roy arranged for the insurance company to receive anonymous tips about Gabriel's conviction and her association with a violent criminal, providing justification for continued coverage denial. When Belinda's condition deteriorated and she could no longer visit Gabriel, his last emotional anchor was severed. The psychiatric facility reported a significant decline in his mental state, with increased catatonic episodes and complete withdrawal from therapy programs. Cindy's situation was more complex, but equally hopeless. Her sister Jerry had been released after serving 2 years, but remained under federal supervision. Roy ensured that Jerry's employment opportunities remained limited through strategic information sharing with potential employers about her criminal conviction and family connections. More cruelly, Roy manipulated Jerry's custody situation with her own children. Through legal channels, he provided evidence to child services suggesting that Jerry's association with Cindy's conspiracy might indicate ongoing child endangerment concerns. While not enough to remove the children, it was sufficient to require intensive supervision and regular evaluations that consumed Jerry's time and limited resources. When Jerry attempted to visit Cindy in federal prison, she found herself under investigation for potential smuggling violations. Accusations that were groundless but required expensive legal defense that she couldn't afford. The message was clear. Any support for Cindy would result in immediate consequences for Jerry's family. Roy's most sophisticated move involved the prisoner's commissary accounts and communication privileges. Through contacts in the federal prison system, including Gerald Daniel, a former client whose construction company had built several federal facilities, Roy ensured that Cindy's incoming funds were frequently lost due to processing errors, and her phone privileges were restricted for minor infractions that mysteriously appeared in her file. It's amazing how often paperwork gets misfiled in the federal system, Gerald mentioned during a business dinner, especially for inmates who don't have anyone advocating for them on the outside. The psychological warfare continued through carefully crafted information campaigns. Roy had Aaron Daly ensure that both Cindy and Gabriel received regular updates about his success and happiness. Newspaper clippings about business victories, photos of Mason's healthy development, reports of Roy's growing social prominence in Dallas society. The most devastating information concerned Mason's thriving development. Roy made sure both prisoners learned that their victim was growing into a happy, intelligent toddler with no memory of their attempted murder. Child development reports were accidentally included in legal correspondence, showing Mason's advanced milestones and secure attachment to his father. Gabriel's response to these updates was complete catatonic withdrawal. His psychiatrist reported that any mention of Roy or Mason triggered severe dissociative episodes, requiring increased medication and isolation protocols. Cindy's reaction was more volatile. She accumulated multiple disciplinary infractions for violent outbursts triggered by news of Roy's continued success. Each infraction extended her sentence and moved her to increasingly restrictive housing conditions. Roy also ensured their crimes continued to haunt them through strategic media management. Whenever either prisoner became eligible for parole consideration or sentence reduction programs, Roy arranged for renewed media coverage of their crimes. The attempted murder of an infant remained emotionally compelling content that guaranteed public outrage and judicial reluctance to reduce sentences. Roy Vaughn builds new life after family betrayal. Read a feature article in Texas Monthly that was delivered to both prisons. The piece detailed Roy's successful single parenting, business expansion, and philanthropic work with child safety organizations, a perfect reminder of everything they'd lost and could never regain. The financial dimension of Roy's revenge was equally thorough. Both prisoners had accumulated significant legal debts that followed them into incarceration. Roy purchased these debts through shell companies, then aggressively pursued collection actions that claimed any assets the prisoners might acquire, including commissary funds, work program earnings, and potential inheritance from deceased relatives. Gabriel's military pension was garnished to pay these debts, leaving him with minimal resources for basic necessities. Cindy's potential earnings from prison work programs were similarly claimed, ensuring she remained in poverty throughout her incarceration. The psychological impact was devastating. Prison counselors reported that both inmates had developed severe depression and anxiety disorders related to their complete social and financial isolation. Neither had any realistic hope of building a life after release. Their crimes were too notorious, their debts too extensive, their support systems too thoroughly destroyed. By Mason's second birthday in October, Roy's revenge had achieved perfect completion. His enemies were not merely imprisoned. They were psychologically, financially, and socially destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. They would serve their full sentences in increasing isolation and despair, then face homelessness and unemployment upon release. Roy celebrated the milestone quietly, sharing birthday cake with Mason in their beautifully renovated home. The toddler laughed and played, healthy and happy, completely unaware of the conspiracy that had once threatened his life or the methodical revenge that had protected his future. Looking at his son's innocent joy, Roy felt complete satisfaction. Justice had been served with interest. The people who tried to destroy his family had been destroyed themselves, leaving Roy free to build the life they'd attempted to steal. Chapter 9. Perfect Justice. 3 years had passed since the New Year's Eve revelation that destroyed Cindy and Gabriel. Roy Vaughn stood in his study, reading the latest reports from Scott Stout about his former wife and business partner. The updates confirmed what he'd always known would happen: their complete and permanent ruin. Gabriel had been transferred to a maximum security psychiatric facility after attempting suicide twice in federal prison. His mental condition had deteriorated beyond recovery, with doctors reporting severe catatonic episodes and complete dissociation from reality. He spent most days staring at walls, occasionally writing incoherent notes about the destroyer and stolen children. His mother Belinda had died the previous winter, alone and impoverished after her cancer treatment failed. Gabriel never learned of her death. His psychiatric team decided the information would cause further deterioration. He would live out his remaining sentence and any potential future believing he'd been abandoned by everyone who'd ever loved him. Cindy's situation was equally hopeless, but more aware. Federal prison had hardened her, but not in ways that would help her survive post-release. She'd accumulated enough disciplinary infractions to ensure she served her full 18-year sentence without possibility of early release. Her attempts to maintain correspondence with the outside world had been systematically sabotaged, leaving her isolated and bitter. The most crushing blow had come when she learned that Mason, now a happy, articulate 3-year-old, had no memory of her existence. Roy had carefully crafted the child's understanding of his family history, explaining that his mother had been sick and couldn't take care of him. Mason called Roy's new girlfriend Mama and showed no interest in hearing about his biological mother. "Daddy, why don't I have a regular mommy like other kids?" Mason had asked recently. Roy knelt to his son's level, choosing his words carefully. "Some mommies get very sick and can't take care of their babies properly. So Daddy has to protect you and make sure you're safe." "But Mama Jackie takes care of me now," Mason replied, referring to Jackie Bradshaw, the former divorce attorney who'd become Roy's romantic partner and was now an integral part of their family. "That's right, buddy. Mama Jackie loves you very much, and we're going to take care of you forever." The irony of Jackie's involvement wasn't lost on Roy. She'd originally been Cindy's divorce attorney before Roy's evidence revealed the conspiracy. Once she understood the full scope of Cindy and Gabriel's crimes, Jackie had provided crucial assistance in Roy's legal strategy. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved into romance, creating a stable family unit that Cindy could never have provided. Jackie brought her own strength to the relationship. She was intelligent, ambitious, and completely committed to Mason's welfare. Unlike Cindy's calculated performances, Jackie's affection for Roy and his son was genuine and unwavering. "Roy's created something beautiful from terrible circumstances," Jackie often told friends. "Mason is thriving because his father protected him from people who would have destroyed his life." The business empire had expanded beyond Roy's original ambitions. His handling of the conspiracy had enhanced his reputation for strategic thinking and decisive action. Major corporations sought partnerships with someone who demonstrated such methodical problem-solving under extreme personal stress. Roy now controlled construction projects across 5 states, employed over 200 people, and maintained extensive political and business connections throughout Texas. The wealth and influence that Cindy and Gabriel had tried to steal had multiplied beyond their wildest schemes. The social dimension of his victory was equally complete. Dallas society had embraced Roy's new family while completely ostracizing anyone associated with the conspiracy. Former friends who'd maintained any contact with Cindy or Gabriel found themselves excluded from social events and business opportunities. Even Gabriel's former military colleagues had distanced themselves after learning about the attempted infanticide. The Marine Corps community, which typically supported veterans through difficult times, viewed Gabriel's crimes as unforgivable betrayals of their values. Roy's philanthropic work with child safety organizations had further enhanced his standing in the community. He donated substantial funds to organizations combating child abuse and family violence, using his platform to speak about protecting innocent children from those who would harm them. "Roy Vaughn represents the best of fatherhood," commented Dr. Ellen Heath during a child safety symposium. When his own family was threatened, he responded with courage and determination to ensure his son's safety. He's an inspiration to parents everywhere. The final confirmation of Roy's complete victory came through intelligence about his enemy's post-release prospects. Gabriel would never be released. His psychiatric condition had been declared permanent and untreatable. He would spend the rest of his life in institutional care, maintained at taxpayer expense while contributing nothing to society. Cindy faced a different, but equally bleak future. Upon release in 12 years, she would emerge into a world where her crimes were well-documented public record. The internet had preserved every detail of her conspiracy, ensuring that potential employers, landlords, and romantic partners would always know about her attempt to murder an infant. Roy had also ensured that her professional licenses were permanently revoked and her educational credentials flagged in databases used by employers. She would face immediate homelessness, unemployment, and social isolation upon release. Most importantly, she would never regain access to Mason. The custody termination was permanent and irreversible. By the time of her release, Mason would be a teenager with no memory of her and no interest in developing a relationship with a woman who'd tried to kill him as an infant. Standing in his study on a quiet Sunday afternoon, watching Mason play in the backyard with Jackie, Roy reflected on the completeness of his justice. He'd promised to destroy everyone who threatened his family, and he'd kept that promise with surgical precision. The people who tried to take everything from him had lost everything themselves. They faced decades of suffering, isolation, and regret, while Roy built the life they'd attempted to steal. Mason was growing up healthy, intelligent, and loved, protected from the evil that had once threatened to destroy him. Roy poured himself a glass of aged whiskey, the same bottle he'd opened the night he'd discovered the conspiracy. It seemed fitting to finish it now, 3 years later, with his victory complete and his enemies permanently defeated. He raised a glass in a private toast to perfect justice. In a world where betrayal often went unpunished and evil sometimes triumphed, Roy Vaughn had proven that methodical determination could achieve absolute victory. His family was safe, his enemies were destroyed, and his future was unlimited. Some men forgave their betrayers and moved on with their lives. Roy had chosen a different path, the path of complete and permanent justice. Looking at his son's laughter and his partner's smile, Roy knew he'd made the right choice. They tried to destroy his world, so he destroyed theirs. The scales of justice were perfectly balanced, and Roy Vaughn stood triumphant over the ruins of his enemies' lives. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Hello, and welcome to Infidelity Tales Lab. Your support means everything to us. We'd love to know, which geographical location are you joining from today? At home? On the go? Share with us below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Cracks in the Foundation. Leroy Fulton stood at the kitchen counter, nursing his third cup of coffee. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the suburban home he'd worked 14 years to afford. Through the glass, he could see the perfectly manicured lawn, the tire swing he'd hung for Cody, and the garden beds where Melissa helped her mother plant tulips every spring. The house was quiet now. Vanessa had taken the kids to school, leaving behind only the scent of her expensive perfume and the remains of a tense breakfast. Their marriage of 12 years had been cooling for months, but lately, it felt like living with a stranger. Another late night at the office? She'd asked last night, her voice carrying an edge he couldn't quite place. The Hendrickson project isn't going to finish itself, Leroy had replied, loosening his tie. As a senior architectural engineer, his expertise came with demanding hours. You know how it is, Van. She'd only nodded, her attention fixed on her phone. The kids missed you at dinner. Again. It wasn't an accusation, not exactly, but it stung all the same. Leroy had been working overtime for months to ensure the promotion that would secure their financial future. The irony wasn't lost on him that his efforts to provide for his family kept him away from them. Now, standing in his empty kitchen, Leroy scrolled through the photos on his phone. Cody's last baseball game, Melissa's dance recital, family vacations to the lake house. When had the distance between him and Vanessa become so vast? When had her smile toward him started looking forced? His phone buzzed with a text from his colleague, Dwayne. Meeting pushed to 11. Boss wants to discuss your promotion. Leroy smiled. At least something was going right. The promotion would mean better hours, more flexibility, and finally, the chance to be present for his family. As he drove to work, Leroy reflected on the changes he'd noticed in Vanessa. Her sudden interest in fitness, new wardrobe, and hours spent at the neighborhood book club. She'd been distant, distracted. He'd attributed it to her frustration with his work schedule, but something nagged at him. Something wasn't right. You're overthinking, he muttered to himself as he pulled into the parking garage. Fix the promotion, fix the hours, fix the marriage. At the office, Dwayne met him with a firm handshake. Today's the day, man. Regional Director Fulton has a nice ring to it. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Leroy said, but he couldn't help smiling. This promotion meant everything. The meeting went perfectly. By noon, Leroy was officially the new Regional Director of Engineering. He immediately called Vanessa to share the news. That's wonderful, she said, her voice oddly flat. We should talk when you get home tonight. The ominous tone made his stomach drop. Everything okay? We'll talk tonight, she repeated before hanging up. Throughout the afternoon, as colleagues congratulated him, Leroy's mind kept wandering to Vanessa's response. He left work early, stopping to pick up champagne and flowers. Whatever was wrong, they would fix it. With his new position, he could finally be the husband and father they deserved. When he arrived home, Vanessa was waiting in the living room, hands clasped in her lap. The children were nowhere to be seen. "Where are the kids?" Leroy asked, setting down his gifts. "At my sister's." Vanessa's face was composed, but her eyes were red-rimmed. "We need to talk, Leroy." He sat across from her, the champagne forgotten. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she began, her voice steady. "We've been growing apart. You're always working, and the kids, they need stability." Leroy leaned forward. "That's why I've been working so hard for this promotion. Things will be different now. Better hours, more time with you and the kids." "It's too late for that," Vanessa interrupted. We need space. I think you should move out for a while. Temporarily." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Move out? Van, whatever problems we're having, we can work through them together. I just got promoted." "The kids need stability," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "They need routine and consistency. You're coming and going at all hours. The tension between us, it's affecting them. I'm asking you to move out temporarily, just until we figure things out." Leroy stared at his wife, searching for the woman he'd married 12 years ago. He thought about Cody and Melissa, how his absence had affected them. Maybe she was right. Maybe some space would help them all. "How long is temporarily?" he asked quietly. "A few weeks. A month at most," she replied, looking relieved. "We'll go to counseling, figure out what's best for the kids." Against his better judgment, Leroy agreed. For the kids. He would do anything for them. That night, he packed a suitcase and checked into the residence in Nir's office. As he sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at the generic landscape painting on the wall, Leroy couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. Something Vanessa wasn't telling him. Chapter 2. The Revelation. A week passed with minimal contact from Vanessa. Leroy called the kids daily, visited twice for awkward dinners where Vanessa remained distant, and threw himself into his new position at work. The separation was supposed to give them clarity, but Leroy felt only a growing unease. "Have you considered that there might be someone else?" Dwayne asked over lunch at their usual spot near the office. Leroy set down his sandwich. "Vanessa wouldn't do that." Dwayne raised an eyebrow. "New clothes, sudden interest in fitness, mysterious book club meetings, asking you to move out temporarily. Come on, man." "We've been together since college," Leroy protested, but doubt had taken root. "She wouldn't throw that away." "For your sake, I hope you're right," Dwayne said. "But maybe do a drive-by, just to ease your mind." The suggestion lingered as Leroy returned to work. That evening, instead of going back to his hotel room, he found himself driving through his neighborhood, toward the home he'd been asked to leave. As he approached, he slowed down. The evening was warm, and several neighbors were out in their yards. His neighbor, Boyd Hughes, was mowing the lawn. Boyd had moved in next door about a year ago after his divorce. He was a physical therapist who worked at the local medical center, friendly enough, though Leroy had always found something off-putting about him. Leroy was about to drive past when the front door of his house opened. Vanessa emerged carrying a glass of what looked like lemonade. She crossed the lawn to where Boyd was finishing up with the mower. Leroy watched, his hands tightening on the steering wheel as she handed Boyd the drink. He could justify that. A neighborly gesture, nothing more. What he couldn't justify was what happened next. Vanessa leaned in and kissed Boyd, not a friendly peck, but the kind of kiss reserved for lovers. Boyd's arm snaked around her waist, pulling her close. Leroy felt physically ill. He pulled over, unable to drive, his vision blurring with anger and betrayal. As he sat there, trying to process what he'd seen, the front door opened again. Cody and Melissa ran out, racing toward Boyd with obvious excitement. "Daddy!" they shouted in unison, throwing themselves at him. Boyd caught them, laughing, swinging Melissa up while ruffling Cody's hair. The tableau was perfectly domestic, a happy family enjoying the evening together. Except it was Boyd in Leroy's place, with Leroy's wife and Leroy's children. The shot gave way to a cold rage unlike anything Leroy had ever experienced. Everything clicked into place. The distance, the book club meetings, Vanessa's insistence that he move out. It hadn't been about space or stability for the kids. It had been about clearing the way for Boyd to take his place. Leroy started the car and drove away before they noticed him. He needed time to think, to plan, because one thing was certain: this betrayal would not stand. That night, he called a real estate agent and instructed her to list the house for sale immediately. The property was in his name. His inheritance had paid for the down payment. Legally, he had every right to sell it. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Fulton?" the agent asked. "Typically, in a marital separation." "I'm sure," Leroy said, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. "I want the for sale sign up tomorrow." Next, he called Omar Hendricks, the best divorce attorney in the city. He explained the situation, including the affair and his children calling another man daddy. "Document everything," Omar advised, "and don't confront them yet. We need to build our case first." Leroy hung up, his mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Did everyone know except him? How could Vanessa and Boyd have manipulated his children into calling another man daddy in just 1 week? The answers would come. For now, Leroy focused on one thing: they would pay for this betrayal. All of them. Chapter 3. The Declaration of War. The for sale sign went up the next day, just as Leroy had instructed. He parked down the street, watching from a distance as the real estate agent hammered it into the front lawn. Within an hour, his phone exploded with texts and calls from Vanessa. He ignored them all, savoring her panic. Finally, he answered. "What the hell are you doing?" Vanessa demanded, her voice shrill. "You can't sell our house." "Actually, I can," Leroy replied calmly. "The deed is in my name. My inheritance, my house. The children." "Don't you dare talk to me about the children," Leroy cut her off, his voice dangerously quiet. "I saw them yesterday, Vanessa. I saw them call Boy Daddy." A beat of silence followed. "Leroy, I can explain." "Save it for the divorce proceedings," he said. "I've already retained an attorney. Expect to be served tomorrow." "Please, let's talk about this like adults," Vanessa pleaded, her tone shifting to conciliatory. "For the sake of the kids who call another man daddy." Leroy laughed bitterly. "Tell me, how long has this been going on? Weeks? Months?" "The entire time I was working overtime for that promotion to give you and the kids a better life." Another pause. "It's complicated." "It's really not," Leroy said. "You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And you turned my children against me. That's not fair." "The kids are confused. They seem pretty clear on who their daddy is now," Leroy retorted. "I wonder what the judge will think about that." "You're being irrational," Vanessa said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please just come home. We can work this out." "I'm being perfectly rational," Leroy replied. "And that house isn't my home anymore. Not with you and Boyd playing house there." "What do you want?" Vanessa asked finally. Leroy's voice hardened. "I want you to understand exactly what you've done. I want you and Boyd to feel what it's like to have everything taken away. And I'm just getting started." He hung up, a grim satisfaction replacing the hollow ache in his chest. The betrayal still hurt. It would probably always hurt, but now he had purpose. They thought they could steal his life, his family. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That evening, Leroy met with Omar to formalize their strategy. The attorney listened as Leroy laid out everything he knew about the affair. "We'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery," Omar said, making notes. "And we'll push for full custody." Full custody? Leroy hadn't considered that. "They call him Daddy now, which actually works in our favor," Omar explained. "It shows parental alienation. They've encouraged the children to replace you. That's considered emotional abuse in family court." The thought of taking the children from Vanessa gave Leroy pause. Despite everything, they were still his kids. But then he remembered their excited voices calling out to Boyd, and his resolve hardened. "Do it," he said. "I want everything, the house, the kids, child support from her." Omar nodded. "We'll need evidence of the affair. Text messages, emails, witness statements, anything you can get." "Leave that to me," Leroy said. Over the next few days, Leroy orchestrated his first moves. He froze the joint bank accounts, transferred his direct deposit to a new account, and hired a private investigator to document the affair. He also reached out to parents of his children's friends and teachers at their school. establishing that he had always been an involved father despite his work schedule. When Vanessa was served with divorce papers, she showed up at his hotel, tears streaming down her face. "You don't have to do this," she begged. "We can still fix things." Leroy regarded her coolly. "There's nothing to fix. You made your choice." "The kids are devastated about the house," she said. "They don't understand why you're doing this." "I'm sure Boyd can console them," Leroy replied. "Since he's daddy now." Vanessa flinched. That was a mistake. They were confused. "Say the lies for someone who still believes them." Leroy cut her off. "You made your bed with Boyd. Now you both get to lie in it." As Vanessa left, Leroy felt a moment of doubt. Was he going too far? Then he remembered the kiss, the children's excited voices calling another man daddy, and the weeks, maybe months, of deception. No, he wasn't going too far. In fact, he was just getting started. The house sale and divorce were only the opening moves. The real revenge was still to come. Because Leroy Fulton never forgot a betrayal. And he never, ever forgave one. Chapter 4. Gathering Intelligence. 2 weeks after filing for divorce, Leroy moved into a sleek downtown apartment. The space was modern and impersonal, the opposite of the warm family home he'd lost, but it suited his current state of mind. He'd arranged his home office to function as a war room, with a whiteboard mapping out his revenge strategy. "You sure you want to go this route?" Dwayne asked, eyeing the detailed plans on the board. "Divorce is one thing, but this is scorched earth." "They scorched the earth first," Leroy replied, uncapping a marker to add another note. "I'm just making sure they reap what they've sown." The private investigator, Marla Winters, had delivered her first report, and it was even worse than Leroy had imagined. Boyd and Vanessa's affair had been going on for 8 months, nearly the entire time Boyd had lived next door. They'd met at the gym, where Boyd worked part-time as a personal trainer, and their workout sessions had quickly moved to his house when Leroy was at work. Even more disturbing, text messages recovered from the family cloud account showed that Vanessa had been deliberately alienating the children from Leroy, telling them that Daddy is too busy for us and that Boyd cares about us more. She'd been laying the groundwork for replacing him long before asking him to move out. "Your wife's been planning this exit for months," Marla had explained. The temporary separation was just to test the waters, see how the kids adjusted to Boyd before making it permanent. The revelation had crystallized Leroy's resolve. This wasn't just an affair born of opportunity or neglect. This was calculated, premeditated betrayal. Now, Leroy studied the information he'd gathered. Boyd Hughes had his own skeletons, a messy divorce, gambling debts at a local casino, and a history of dating married women. His physical therapy practice was struggling financially, which explained his interest in Vanessa, whose family had money. Vanessa's vulnerabilities were equally clear. Her social standing in the community mattered enormously to her, as did her image as a perfect mother. She'd been secretly funneling money from their joint account to Boyd for months, ostensibly for training sessions, but actually helping him cover his gambling losses. "The custody hearing is next week," Dwayne reminded him. "You ready for that?" Leroy nodded grimly. More than ready. That evening, Leroy met with Omar to review their custody strategy. The attorney seemed impressed by the evidence Leroy had gathered. Parental alienation, financial infidelity, exposing the children to her affair partner. "The judge won't look kindly on any of this," Omar said. "But be prepared. She'll come at you hard about your work hours." "I've addressed that," Leroy said. "My new position allows flexible hours and remote work. I've already arranged a modified schedule to accommodate school pickups and activities." Omar nodded approvingly. "Good. And what about this?" He tapped a folder labeled Phase 2. "That's personal," Leroy said. "Nothing illegal, but not relevant to the custody case." Omar gave him a knowing look. "Just be careful. Revenge may feel good in the moment, but it can backfire." Leroy's expression hardened. This isn't about feeling good. It's about justice. Later that night, Leroy received a text from an unknown number. It was Boyd. "We need to talk. Man to man." Leroy considered ignoring it, but then saw an opportunity. "Your place. Tomorrow. 8 p.m. The response came immediately. "Thank you." Leroy smiled grimly. Boyd had no idea what was coming. The next evening, Leroy arrived at Boyd's house precisely at 8. The neighbor's house was smaller than his own, a bachelor pad with minimal furnishings and a prominent large-screen TV. Boyd opened the door, looking uncomfortable. "Thanks for coming. Can I get you a drink?" "Let's skip the pleasantries," Leroy said, remaining standing. "What do you want?" Boyd sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Look, I know you're upset." "Upset?" Leroy repeated with a hollow laugh. "Is that what you think this is?" "I know it's more than that." Boyd backpedaled. "But this situation has gotten out of control. The kids are suffering." "Don't you dare talk about my children," Leroy cut him off, his voice deadly quiet. "You don't have the right." Boyd held up his hands. "I care about them too. That's why I wanted to talk. This war you're waging, selling the house, freezing accounts, the custody battle, it's hurting everyone. Again, why should I care? You and Vanessa didn't care about hurting me when you started sleeping together. You didn't care about hurting the kids when you encouraged them to call you daddy." Boyd had the grace to look ashamed. "That was wrong. I admit that. But it only happened a couple of times, and Vanessa corrected them." "After 8 months of sneaking around?" Leroy challenged. "After deliberately turning them against me? After asking me to move out so you could move in? Save your lies for someone stupid enough to believe them." Boyd's expression changed, growing harder. "What do you want, Leroy? Money? I'll pay you back for the training sessions." Leroy laughed. "You think this is about money? This is about the fact that you and Vanessa tried to steal my life. My home. My children. Nobody stole anything," Boyd protested. "Marriages end. People move on." "They do," Leroy agreed, his voice softening dangerously. "And actions have consequences." Something in Leroy's tone made Boyd pale. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," Leroy replied with a cold smile. "I'm just letting you know that I'm fully aware of everything. The gambling debts, the pattern of targeting married women, the money Vanessa's been funneling to you. All of it." Boyd's face went from pale to ashen. "How did you?" "Doesn't matter," Leroy cut him off. "What matters is that you and Vanessa made a critical mistake. You thought I was weak, that I'd roll over and accept your betrayal." He stepped closer. "I'm going to take back everything that's mine, and then I'm going to make sure you both lose everything else." "This is insane," Boyd stammered. "You need help, man. Therapy or something." "What I need," Leroy said evenly, "is for you to understand exactly who you're dealing with. This isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy call to let you know that your comfortable little plan is about to implode." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Boyd, the next time you try to play daddy with my kids, remember this conversation." As Leroy walked back to his car, he felt a cold satisfaction. The fear in Boyd's eyes had been real. Good. Let him worry. Let him wonder what was coming next. Because phase 2 of Leroy's plan was about to begin. Chapter 5. Laying the groundwork. The custody hearing arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Leroy sat beside Omar in the sterile courtroom, watching as Vanessa entered with her attorney, Patricia Conway, a shark-like woman known for aggressive tactics in divorce cases. Vanessa looked exhausted, her designer outfit unable to hide the toll the past weeks had taken. Boyd was notably absent, a tactical decision, Leroy assumed, to distance himself from the proceedings. Judge Harriet Sandoval, a no-nonsense veteran of family court, reviewed the preliminary documents with a frown. "Before we begin, I want to be clear that my only concern is the well-being of the minor children. I don't care about your personal grievances with each other." The hearing proceeded. Vanessa's attorney presented her as a devoted stay-at-home mother whose entire life revolved around the children. She painted Leroy as a workaholic who had emotionally abandoned his family. "Mrs. Fulton has been the primary caregiver since the children were born," Conway argued. "Mr. Fulton regularly worked 60-hour weeks, missing school events and family dinners. The children have stability with their mother." When it was Omar's turn, he approached the matter differently. "Your Honor, we agree that Mrs. Fulton has been physically present. What we contest is the quality of her care and the deliberate campaign to alienate the children from their father." He presented the evidence, text messages where Vanessa told the children that Daddy doesn't want to be with us anymore, records showing that she had scheduled important school events during Leroy's planned visitation times, and testimony from Melissa's teacher that Vanessa had instructed the school to remove Leroy from the emergency contact list weeks before the separation. Then came the bombshell, photos from the private investigator showing Boyd and Vanessa together, dating back 8 months, along with bank records of the money transfers. Mrs. Fulton has been conducting an affair with a neighbor for 8 months, Omar stated. She has exposed the children to this relationship, encouraged them to call this man daddy, and used family funds to support his gambling addiction. Vanessa gasped, her composure cracking. That's not true. Boyd doesn't have a gambling problem. Judge Sandoval's gaze sharpened. Mrs. Fulton, you will speak only when addressed by the court. Conway tried to recover, arguing that Leroy's evidence was obtained unethically, but the damage was done. The judge had seen the bank records, the texts, the timeline of deception. When Leroy took the stand, he spoke with calm sincerity about his love for his children and his new work arrangements that would allow him to be present for them. I worked those long hours to provide for my family, he explained. The promotion I recently received was the goal I'd been working toward. Better pay, better hours, the ability to be more present. I never imagined my wife was using my absence to replace me in my children's lives. By the end of the hearing, Judge Sandoval looked troubled. I'll render my decision within the week, she announced. In the meantime, the current visitation schedule will remain in effect. Outside the courtroom, Conway approached Omar and Leroy with a proposal. My client is willing to discuss a more equitable custody arrangement and property division if Mr. Fulton will reconsider selling the house. Leroy met Vanessa's pleading gaze across the hallway. Tell your client that ship has sailed, he replied. We'll wait for the judge's ruling. Later that day, Leroy received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. Trish Winters, Vanessa's best friend since college. He almost didn't answer when the concierge called up, but curiosity won out. Trish looked uncomfortable standing in his minimalist living room. I probably shouldn't be here, she began, declining his offer of a drink. But I thought you should know some things. About Vanessa and Boyd? Leroy asked, gesturing for her to sit. Trish nodded, perching on the edge of the sofa. It's worse than you think. Boyd approached Vanessa, not the other way around. He had this whole system. Find unhappy wives at the gym, become their trainer, their confidant, then their lover. Leroy's jaw tightened. And you knew about this? Not at first, Trish admitted. Vanessa only told me they were having problems with you. By the time I realized what was really happening, they were already... She trailed off. Sleeping together, Leroy finished flatly. Trish nodded miserably. I told her to end it, to come clean with you. But Boyd had convinced her that you didn't really care about her or the kids anymore. And the children calling him daddy, that was his idea too, Trish said, looking genuinely disgusted. He told Vanessa it would help them adjust to the new family structure. I thought it was sick, but Vanessa was completely under his spell. Leroy processed this information, adding it to his mental file. Why are you telling me this now? Trish sighed. Because after the hearing today, I saw who Boyd really is. When the judge seemed to be leaning your way, he told Vanessa that maybe they should cut their losses, meaning her and the kids. He's already seeing someone else, Leroy. Some divorcee from his gym with a hefty settlement. The revelation should have brought satisfaction, but Leroy only felt a deep, cold anger. Not just at Boyd now, but at Vanessa for being so easily manipulated for putting their children in this position. Does Vanessa know you're here? He asked. Trish shook her head. She wouldn't listen anyway. Boyd has convinced her that you're the villain, that you're being cruel and vindictive. I am being vindictive, Leroy acknowledged. But only because they tried to take everything from me. After Trish left, Leroy updated his revenge board with the new information. Boyd's pattern of targeting vulnerable married women, his quick pivot to a new prospect when things got difficult. These were weaknesses Leroy could exploit. Phase 2 would require precision timing. The custody decision, the house sale, and his next moves all needed to align perfectly. Leroy picked up his phone and made a call to Marla, the PI. I need everything you can get on Boyd's new target, he instructed. And I mean everything. The woman's voice was clipped, professional. I'd advise against direct confrontation or harassment, Mr. Fulton. Nothing like that, Leroy assured her. Just information. Knowledge is power, after all. 3 days later, Judge Sandoval issued her custody ruling. Joint legal custody with Leroy as the primary physical custodian. Vanessa would have the children on weekends and Wednesday evenings. The ruling cited concerns about Vanessa's judgment in involving the children in her relationship with Boyd and the documented attempts at parental alienation. Vanessa called immediately, sobbing. "How could you do this? Take my children from me." "I didn't," Leroy replied calmly. "Your actions did. You chose Boyd over your family." "I made a mistake," she cried. "I know that now. Boyd isn't who I thought he was. Let me guess, he's already moved on to his next target?" Leroy couldn't keep the bitter satisfaction from his voice. Vanessa's silence was answer enough. "The house closes next week," Leroy continued. "You have until Friday to remove your belongings." "Where are we supposed to go?" Vanessa asked, desperation evident in her voice. "That's not my problem anymore," Leroy said. "Maybe Boyd will take you in." "Oh, wait, he's busy with his new girlfriend." As he hung up, Leroy felt no joy in Vanessa's distress, only the grim determination to complete what he'd started. Boyd had moved on to his next victim, leaving Vanessa to face the consequences alone. But Leroy wasn't finished with either of them. The next phase would ensure that Boyd could never do to another family what he'd done to Leroy's. And Vanessa would understand exactly what her betrayal had cost. The foundations were laid. Now it was time to build the trap that would destroy them both. Chapter 6. The trap is set. The closing on the house went smoothly. Leroy used his portion of the proceeds to purchase a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a good school district, ensuring the children would have stability. The rest he set aside in a trust for Cody and Melissa's education, accessible only when they turned 18. Vanessa had moved in with her sister temporarily, her relationship with Boyd effectively over. According to Trish, who had become an unexpected ally, Boyd had completely ghosted Vanessa once the custody ruling came down, moving on to his new target, Renee Simmons, a recently divorced pharmaceutical sales rep with a substantial settlement. "She's devastated," Trish reported during one of their coffee meetings. "Not just about Boyd, but about losing primary custody. She finally sees how she was manipulated, but it's too late." Leroy felt a flicker of pity, quickly extinguished by the memory of his children calling another man daddy. "She made her choices," he said simply. The first weekend the children came to stay at his new house was tense. Cody, at 10, was old enough to understand some of what had happened and regarded Leroy with wary resentment. 8-year-old Melissa was confused and tearful, asking repeatedly when they could go home. "This is your home now," Leroy explained patiently, showing them their rooms, decorated according to their preferences. "At least part of the time. You'll still see Mom on weekends." "And Boyd?" Cody asked, a challenge in his young voice. Leroy crouched to his son's level. "Boyd won't be around anymore. He and your mom aren't together now." Melissa's face crumpled. "But he said he was going to be our new daddy." The pain was sharp, but Leroy kept his expression gentle. "I know things have been confusing, but I'm your dad. I've always been your dad, and I always will be. No one can change that." Over dinner, he avoided discussing Vanessa or the divorce, instead focusing on their interests and school activities. Slowly, the tension eased. By bedtime, Melissa had curled up beside him on the couch, and Cody had begrudgingly shown him his latest video game progress. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Rebuilding his relationship with his children would take time, but Leroy was committed to the process. They were innocent victims in this mess, manipulated by the adults they trusted. The following week, Leroy implemented the next phase of his plan. With Marla's help, he compiled a comprehensive dossier on Boyd's predatory pattern, the married women he'd targeted at the gym, the financial support he'd extracted from them, and his swift abandonment when things got complicated. He arranged a meeting with the owner of the health club where Boyd worked as a trainer. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Leroy assured the nervous manager, Carlton Mills. "I just think you should be aware of what's happening on your premises." He presented the evidence, statements from 3 women Boyd had pursued, bank records showing the money Vanessa had given him, and documentation of his gambling debts. He's using your facility to target vulnerable women, Leroy explained. Specifically, married women with access to financial resources. Once he bleeds them dry or things get complicated, he moves on to the next target. Carlton reviewed the material with growing alarm. I had no idea. We've had a few complaints about him being too friendly with female clients, but nothing like this. His latest target is Renee Simmons, Leroy added. She trains with him Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I'll address this immediately, Carlton promised. This behavior violates every ethical standard we have. Boyd was fired the next day. According to Trish, who heard it from Vanessa, he was escorted out mid-session, his belongings from the employee locker room delivered to him in the parking lot. The timing aligned perfectly with Leroy's next move. Through Omar, he had quietly contacted the casino where Boyd had accumulated his gambling debts. The manager was very interested to learn about Boyd's sudden unemployment and his pattern of extracting money from vulnerable women. We take problem gambling very seriously, the casino manager assured Omar. We'll ensure Mr. Hughes is added to our exclusion list. And of course, we'll be pursuing collection of his outstanding debts. With Boyd's primary income gone and his access to the casino revoked, Leroy knew his financial situation would quickly become desperate. The gambling debts weren't huge, about $30,000. But without income and with his reputation in the physical therapy community now tarnished, Boyd would struggle to make payments. The next part required careful timing. Leroy had learned from Marla that Boyd had been falsifying some of his physical therapy credentials. He hadn't completed the continuing education requirements for his license renewal, but had submitted documentation claiming he had. An anonymous tip to the state licensing board would ensure that Boyd's private practice, already struggling, would come under scrutiny. But Leroy held that card for now, waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, he focused on rebuilding his life with his children. The transition was challenging, but each week brought improvement. Cody gradually dropped his defensive attitude, and Melissa stopped asking about Boyd. They established new routines, new traditions. Vanessa, however, was struggling. Without Boyd or her children full-time, she seemed lost. Her sister was pressuring her to find her own place, but with no income of her own and the divorce settlement still pending, her options were limited. She's talking about moving back to her parents' place in Phoenix, Trish reported. She can't afford to stay here, especially with child support payments. The news gave Leroy pause. If Vanessa moved out of state, it would complicate the custody arrangement and potentially hurt the children. Tell her I'll meet with her, he said finally. Just her. No lawyers. They met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Vanessa looked thinner, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple blouse. The confident, polished woman he'd married was gone, replaced by someone who seemed perpetually on the verge of tears. Thank you for meeting me, she said, her voice subdued. I wasn't sure you would. Leroy nodded curtly. Trish mentioned you're considering moving to Phoenix. I don't have much choice, Vanessa replied. I can't afford to stay here. My parents offered me their guest house until I can get back on my feet. And the kids. Vanessa looked down at her coffee. I was hoping we could revise the custody arrangement. Summer with me, school year with you, or longer visits during school breaks. Leroy considered his next words carefully. Despite everything, he didn't want to punish his children by depriving them of their mother. But he also wasn't willing to disrupt the stability they were finally establishing. I'll have Omar draw up an amendment to the custody agreement, he said finally. You keep your weekends when you're in town, plus extended time during school breaks. But the children stay with me during the school year. Relief flooded Vanessa's face. Thank you. That's more than fair given. She trailed off. Given that you try to replace me with Boyd? Leroy finished, his voice cooler now. Given that you taught our children to call another man daddy? Yes, it is more than fair. Vanessa flinched. I've apologized for that. I was wrong. Terrible, unforgivably wrong. Boyd manipulated me, but I let him. I betrayed you and the kids, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Save the apologies. Leroy cut her off. They don't change anything. What more do you want from me? Vanessa asked, desperation edging into her voice. You've taken the house, the kids, my reputation in the community. I'm moving halfway across the country. Isn't that enough? Leroy regarded her dispassionately. You chose Boyd over our family. You lied, cheated, manipulated our children, and when it all fell apart, you expected sympathy. He leaned forward. Let me be perfectly clear. I will never forgive what you did. Ever. The only reason I'm being civil is for Cody and Melissa's sake. Tears spilled down Vanessa's cheeks. I know. I don't deserve forgiveness. But please don't punish the kids because of my mistakes. I'm not punishing anyone, Leroy replied. I'm protecting what's mine. He stood, leaving his coffee untouched. Omar will contact your attorney about the amended custody agreement. As he walked away, Leroy felt a familiar cold satisfaction. Vanessa was broken, her perfect life in shambles. Boyd was unemployed, blacklisted, and facing financial ruin. Everything was proceeding according to plan, but there was still one final phase to execute. The piece of the puzzle that would ensure neither of them could ever recover from their betrayal. It was time to spring the trap. Chapter 7. The First Domino Falls. 3 months after Vanessa moved to Phoenix, Leroy received an unexpected call from Renee Simmons, Boyd's latest target. He had been monitoring the situation through Marla, but hadn't anticipated direct contact. Mr. Fulton? You don't know me, but I think we have a mutual problem, Renee began, her voice tense. Boyd Hughes. Leroy's interest was immediately piqued. What can I do for you, Miss Simmons? I understand you were married to Vanessa Fulton, and that Boyd was involved with her. That's correct, Leroy confirmed, careful to keep his tone neutral. Though we're divorced now. I've recently discovered some disturbing information about Boyd, Renee continued. Let's just say I'm not the only woman he's been seeing. And there are financial irregularities I can't ignore. I'm familiar with his methods, Leroy said. I've ended things with him, but now he's becoming threatening, Renee explained. Calling at all hours, showing up at my workplace. He seems desperate. This was an unexpected development. Boyd turning aggressive when his usual tactics failed. Leroy considered the implications. Have you contacted the police? I filed a report, but they said they can't do much without evidence of an actual threat. Renee sounded frustrated. Your ex-wife's friend, Trish, suggested I call you. She said you might have information that could help. Leroy smiled slightly. Trish had become an unexpected ally in all this. I may, yes. Would you be willing to meet? They arranged to meet at a downtown restaurant the following evening. Renee was an attractive woman in her early 40s, poised and professional in her pharmaceutical sales role. She brought a folder of her own documentation. He convinced me to invest in his private physical therapy practice, she explained, showing Leroy the paperwork. $50,000, supposedly secured against the business assets. Then I discovered he's not even licensed properly. Leroy nodded. His continuing education credits were falsified. The state board is already investigating. Renee looked surprised. How do you know that? I've been tracking Boyd's activities for some time, Leroy admitted. After what he did to my family, I wanted to ensure he couldn't do it to anyone else. Understanding dawned in Renee's eyes. The anonymous complaint to the licensing board. The casino ban. The gym firing. That was all you. Leroy neither confirmed nor denied, simply giving her a measured look. Boyd has a pattern of targeting vulnerable women, extracting money, then moving on. He nearly destroyed my family. I'm merely ensuring there are consequences. I'm not usually vindictive, Renee said slowly. But he's taken money I can't afford to lose. Money from my divorce settlement meant for my daughter's college fund. And now these threats. She pushed her phone across the table, showing a series of increasingly desperate and angry texts for Boyd. Leroy reviewed them carefully. The progression was clear. Initial pleas, then manipulation, finally thinly veiled threats about making her regret cutting him off. This is actionable, Leroy noted, especially combined with showing up at your workplace. You need a restraining order. The police said there weren't specific enough threats, Renee repeated. The police don't always get it right, Leroy replied. I know someone who can help. A specialist in protective orders for women dealing with harassment. He took out his phone and called Omar, explaining the situation briefly. After the call, he turned back to Renee. Omar's associate can see you tomorrow morning. She has an excellent success rate with these cases. Thank you, Renee said, genuine gratitude in her voice. But what about my investment? Boyd's already spent most of it, for what I can tell. That's where I may be able to help, Leroy said. I've been building a case against Boyd for some time. With your documentation added to what I already have, we can file a civil suit for fraud. He won't be able to pay immediately, but we can secure a judgment against any future earnings. Renee studied him thoughtfully. This isn't just about helping me, is it? This is part of your plan. Leroy smiled slightly. Let's just say our interests align. You want your money back and protection from Boyd. I want to ensure he faces consequences for his actions. Does my motivation matter if the outcome benefits us both? I suppose not, Renee conceded. What's the next step? Over the next 2 weeks, Leroy's plan accelerated. With Renee's documentation added to his own evidence, Omar filed a comprehensive civil suit against Boyd for fraud, misrepresentation, and harassment. The restraining order was granted, prohibiting Boyd from coming within 500 feet of Renee or contacting her in any way. Boyd's response was predictable: panic. He called Leroy repeatedly, finally catching him on a Sunday afternoon. "You're behind this, aren't you?" Boyd demanded, his voice slurring slightly. The license investigation, the casino ban, and now this lawsuit with Renee. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Leroy replied calmly. "Bullshit," Boyd spat. "You've been systematically destroying my life for months. This has to stop." Leroy's voice hardened. "Like you stopped when you pursued my wife, when you convinced my children to call you daddy, when you tried to take over my family." "That was different," Boyd protested. "Vanessa was unhappy. I didn't force her into anything. You targeted a vulnerable woman, manipulated her against her husband, used her for money, and then discarded her when things got difficult," Leroy corrected him. "Just like you did with Renee and who knows how many others." "I'm ruined, Leroy." Boyd's voice cracked with genuine desperation. "The license board is suspending me pending investigation. The casino is suing me for unpaid debts. I can't get hired anywhere because of the gym firing. And now this fraud case? I'll never recover." "That sounds like a personal problem," Leroy replied coldly. "Perhaps you should have considered the potential consequences before you decided to destroy my family." "What do you want?" Boyd asked, defeat evident in his voice. "Money? I don't have any. An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. Just call off the dogs." "I don't want anything from you," Leroy said. "I've already taken back what's mine, my children, my dignity. You're merely experiencing the natural consequences of your actions." After hanging up, Leroy felt the familiar cold satisfaction. Boyd was spiraling exactly as planned. The first domino had fallen. The next target was Vanessa. While Boyd's destruction was professional and financial, Vanessa's would be more personal. Through Trish, Leroy had learned that Vanessa was struggling in Phoenix. Living in her parents' guest house had quickly become intolerable, with her mother's constant criticism and her father's thinly veiled disappointment. She'd found a job as an administrative assistant at a local medical practice, but the pay barely covered her child support payments and basic expenses. More importantly, she was desperate to rebuild her relationship with the children. The distance made it difficult, despite Leroy's adherence to the amended custody agreement allowing extended visits during school breaks. It was this desperation that Leroy intended to leverage. When the children returned from their spring break visit to Phoenix, Cody was unusually quiet. After Melissa went to bed, Leroy found his son sitting alone in the backyard, staring at the night sky. "Everything okay, buddy?" Leroy asked, settling into the chair beside him. Cody shrugged. "Mom's boyfriend was weird." Leroy's attention sharpened. "Boyfriend? Your mom is dating someone." "Some guy from her work?" Cody explained. "He stayed over a couple of nights. He kept trying to be all buddy-buddy with us, but it felt fake." The parallel to Boyd was unmistakable. Leroy kept his tone neutral. "Did that make you uncomfortable?" Cody nodded. "Mom kept saying we needed to give him a chance, that he could be part of our family someday. I told her we already have a dad." He glanced at Leroy. "That's what you always tell us, right? That no one can replace you as our dad." Leroy felt a surge of pride in his son's perception. "That's right. No one can ever change that. That's what I told Mom," Cody continued. "She got really upset, said I was being difficult on purpose. The information was perfect, exactly what Leroy needed." "Thank you for telling me, Cody. I'll talk to your mom about this." The next day, Leroy called Omar. I need to modify the custody agreement again. Vanessa has a new boyfriend staying overnight during the children's visits. Cody says she's pressuring them to accept him as part of the family. Omar understood immediately. Given the history with Boyd, this could be considered a pattern of behavior harmful to the children's emotional well-being. I'll file a motion for supervised visitation only. The motion was granted surprisingly quickly. Judge Sandoval remembered the previous case well and viewed this new development as a continuation of Vanessa's poor judgment regarding the children's relationships with male figures. Vanessa was devastated. She called Leroy, sobbing. How could you do this? Mark is just a friend who stayed over because his apartment was being fumigated. That's not what Cody says, Leroy replied calmly. He says you told him Mark could be part of the family someday. Sound familiar, Vanessa? Like Boyd all over again. It's nothing like that. Vanessa protested. I've learned my lesson. I would never repeat that mistake. The judge disagrees, Leroy said. Supervised visitation only until you demonstrate better judgment. Please, Vanessa begged. The children are all I have left. Don't take them from me. For a moment, Leroy almost felt pity. Then he remembered his children calling Boyd Daddy, and his resolve hardened. You did this to yourself, Vanessa. Actions have consequences. The final domino was about to fall. Chapter 8. The Wheels of Justice. 6 months into Leroy's campaign of retribution, the results were undeniable. Boyd Hughes had filed for bankruptcy, unable to pay the mounting judgments against him from the casino, Renee's fraud case, and various creditors. His physical therapy license had been suspended pending the investigation into his falsified continuing education credits, effectively ending his career. According to Marla's latest report, Boyd had left the state, moving to Nevada to work as a barback at a small casino, a humiliating step down for a man who once styled himself as a sophisticated professional. Vanessa remained in Phoenix, struggling with the limitations of supervised visitation and the financial strain of child support payments. Her parents' initial sympathy had soured into resentment, creating a tense living situation. She's talking about contesting the custody arrangement again, Trish reported during one of their regular updates. She's saying she'll prove you manipulated Cody into saying those things about Mark. Leroy had anticipated this. Let her try. Cody is old enough that the judge will interview him privately. He'll tell the truth. Don't you think this has gone far enough? Trish asked, looking troubled. Vanessa's a mess. She cries all the time, barely eats. Her relationship with her parents is falling apart. She lost her job last week. Why should I care? Leroy asked coldly. Trish sighed. Because you're not a monster, Leroy. What Vanessa and Boyd did was terrible, but this systematic destruction of their lives, it's changing you. Her words gave him pause. Had his pursuit of justice turned into something darker? He dismissed the thought. They had tried to steal everything from him, his family, his home, his identity as a father. They deserved everything that had happened to them. This isn't about revenge anymore, he told Trish. It's about protection. As long as Vanessa keeps trying to replace me with other men in my children's lives, I'll keep fighting her. But in the quiet moments, late at night when the children were asleep, Leroy sometimes questioned his own motivations. The cold satisfaction he felt at Boyd's downfall and Vanessa's struggles. Was that justice or something uglier? These reflections were interrupted by an unexpected development. Renee Simmons called with alarming news. Boyd's back in town, she said without preamble. And he's been asking about you. Leroy straightened in his chair. What do you mean? One of the trainers in my new gym knows him from before, Renee explained. Boyd approached him asking all sorts of questions about you. Your schedule, where you live, whether you're seeing anyone. It sounded concerning. Did he violate the restraining order? Leroy asked. No, he's been careful about that, Renee replied. But the way my trainer described it, Boyd seemed obsessed with you. Blamed you for everything that's happened to him. Leroy considered this information. Boyd had always struck him as a coward, more likely to run than confront. But desperation could change a man. Thank you for letting me know, he said. I'll take precautions. Those precautions included installing a security system at his home and informing his children's school about potential concerns. He also called Marla, requesting enhanced surveillance on Boyd's movements. 2 days later, Marla confirmed Renee's warning. Hughes is staying at the Motel 6 on Route 30, she reported. He's been drinking heavily and making threatening statements about you to anyone who'll listen. Has he attempted contact? Leroy asked. Not yet, Marla replied. But he's been driving past your house and the children's school. I've documented everything in case you need to file for a protective order. Leroy considered his options. A protective order might provoke Boyd rather than deter him. Better to let the man believe he was undetected for now, while monitoring his movements. The confrontation, when it came, was not what Leroy expected. He was working late at his office when the security desk called up. Mr. Fulton, there's a gentleman here insisting on seeing you. A Mr. Hughes. He seems agitated. Leroy's pulse quickened. I'll come down. In the lobby, Boyd looked like a shadow of his former self. Gone was the polished personal trainer with the perfect hair and confident smile. This Boyd was gaunt, with several days' stubble and bloodshot eyes. He reeked of alcohol. You finally got the guts to face me. Boyd slurred when he saw Leroy. Been avoiding me for days. Leroy remained calm. I've been aware of your presence, Boyd. The smart move would have been to stay in Nevada. Boyd's face contorted with anger. You ruined my life. Everything I built. Gone because of you. You built nothing, Leroy corrected him. You preyed on vulnerable women, stole their money, and moved on when things got complicated. I merely exposed what you already were. You had no right. Boyd took a step forward, drawing the attention of the security guard. Vanessa wanted me. The kids like me better than you. You couldn't accept that, so you destroyed everything. Leroy's voice turned glacial. You entered my home, slept with my wife, and encouraged my children to call you daddy. You have the audacity to stand there and claim I had no right to protect what's mine. Boyd's hand moved to his pocket, and Leroy tensed, but the security guard was faster, stepping between them. Sir, I need you to leave now, the guard told Boyd firmly, before I call the police. Boyd hesitated, then sneered at Leroy. This isn't over. Actually, it is, Leroy replied. You're finished, Boyd. You have nothing left to threaten me with. After Boyd was escorted out, Leroy called Omar. I need an emergency protective order. Boyd Hughes just confronted me in my office. He may have been armed. Within hours, a temporary protective order was in place. The police conducted a welfare check at Boyd's motel room, but reported he had already checked out. We'll patrol near your residence tonight, the officer assured Leroy. But you might want to consider staying elsewhere until we locate him. Leroy arranged for the children to stay with Dwayne and his wife for the night, then returned home to gather some essentials. As he was packing a bag, the doorbell rang. Checking the security camera, Leroy was stunned to see Vanessa standing on his porch. He opened the door cautiously. What are you doing here? He demanded. You're supposed to be in Phoenix. Vanessa looked terrible, thin, with dark circles under her eyes and a haunted expression. Boyd called me, she said without preamble. He's completely unhinged, Leroy. He threatened to hurt you and take the kids. Leroy's blood ran cold. When did he call you? About an hour ago, Vanessa replied, shivering despite the warm evening. He said he was going to make you pay, that he'd take everything from you like you took everything from him. The children are safe, Leroy assured her, surprised by her apparent concern. They're with Dwayne. Come inside. Once in the living room, Vanessa seemed to collapse in on herself. This is all my fault, she whispered. I let him into our lives. I believe his lies. And now he's threatening our children. The police are looking for him, Leroy said. There's a protective order in place. Vanessa laughed bitterly. A piece of paper won't stop him. You didn't hear him, Leroy. He's lost everything. He has nothing left to lose. Why come warn me? Leroy asked, studying her carefully. Why not just call? Because I needed you to believe me, Vanessa said simply. After everything, I know you have no reason to trust anything I say. But this is about our children. Before Leroy could respond, his phone rang. It was Marla. Hughes just checked into the Sunset Motel, 2 miles from your house, she reported. And he purchased a handgun 3 days ago at a pawn shop in Nevada. Legal sale, but concerning given his current state. Leroy's decision was immediate. Call the police. Tell them everything you know. He hung up and turned to Vanessa. Boyd has a gun. The police are being notified. Fear flashed across Vanessa's face. Oh God, what have I done? Bringing him into our lives, near our children. You need to leave, Leroy told her. Go to a hotel. Go back to Phoenix. Just get away from here until Boyd is in custody. Vanessa shook her head. No, I'm done running from my mistakes. I'm going to the police station to make a statement about his threats. Maybe that will help them find him faster. Leroy was surprised by her resolve. I'll drive you. As they headed to Leroy's car, a vehicle turned sharply into the driveway, blocking them in. Boyd emerged, unsteady on his feet, a pistol in his hand. Well, isn't this touching? He slurred, gesturing with the gun. The happy couple, back together. Leroy pushed Vanessa behind him. Boyd put the gun down. The police are already on their way. Boyd laughed, a broken sound. Of course they are. You've thought of everything, haven't you, Leroy? Always one step ahead. This won't solve anything, Leroy said calmly, though his heart was pounding. You're just making things worse for yourself. Worse? Boyd's laugh turned hysterical. How could anything be worse? I lost my license, my business, my reputation. I'm living in flea-bag motels, working for minimum wage. And it's all because of you. No, Vanessa spoke up, stepping out from behind Leroy. It's because of me. I'll let you manipulate me. I betrayed my family for you. Leroy was just protecting what was his. Boyd's gaze shifted to Vanessa, his expression darkening. You're defending him now? After everything we had? We had nothing, Vanessa replied firmly. You used me to get what you wanted. You used my children. Boyd's hand tightened on the gun. Shut up. Both of you just shut up. Leroy tensed, ready to move if Boyd raised the weapon. But instead, Boyd seemed to deflate, the gun lowering slightly. I just wanted what you had, he said, his voice suddenly small. The perfect family, the nice house. Is that so wrong? You could have built your own life, Leroy replied. Instead, you tried to steal mine. In the distance, police sirens wailed. Boyd's head snapped up, panic replacing the brief vulnerability. No more talking, he snarled, raising the gun again. You took everything from me. Now I take something from you. Time seemed to slow as Boyd aimed the weapon. Leroy lunged forward, tackling Boyd just as the gun discharged. They crashed to the ground, wrestling for control of the weapon. Vanessa screamed, and then suddenly multiple police officers were there, shouting commands. Drop the weapon. Police. Boyd's resistance crumbled. The gun fell from his hand, and officers quickly secured him, pulling him away from Leroy. Are you hit? One officer asked Leroy, helping him to his feet. Leroy shook his head, breathing hard. No, we're okay. As Boyd was led to a police cruiser, he locked eyes with Leroy one last time. This isn't over, he called out. You'll never be free of me. Actually, it is over, Leroy replied calmly. Attempted murder with a firearm carries a minimum sentence of 20 years in this state. By the time you get out, Boyd, no one will even remember your name. Later, at the police station, after providing their statements, Leroy and Vanessa sat in silence in the waiting area. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving them both exhausted. Thank you, Vanessa said finally, for saving my life back there. Leroy nodded, but said nothing. I know you'll never forgive me, she continued. I don't expect you to, but I want you to know I regret everything. Not just because of how it turned out, but because of what I did to you and the children. Leroy studied her, seeing genuine remorse for the first time. What happens now, Vanessa? You go back to Phoenix, back to supervised visitation. She shook her head. I'm moving back here, if I can find work. I want to be closer to the kids, even if it's just for supervised visits. My parents are selling their house anyway, downsizing for retirement. And if Boyd makes bail, he won't, Vanessa said confidently. The detective said the judge would deny bail given the circumstances. She hesitated, then added, even if he did, I'm done being afraid. I let fear and insecurity drive me into Boyd's arms. I won't make that mistake again. Something had shifted between them, not forgiveness. Leroy knew he would never fully forgive her betrayal, but perhaps a recognition that they would always be connected through their children. I'll have Omar revise the custody agreement, he said finally. If you're living locally, we can adjust the visitation schedule. still supervised, but more frequent. Tears filled Vanessa's eyes. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve." Leroy stood, ready to leave. "You're right about that, but it's what the children deserve." As he walked away, Leroy felt a strange sense of closure. Boyd would face justice for his crimes. Vanessa had finally acknowledged her role in the destruction of their family. The systematic revenge Leroy had orchestrated had accomplished its purpose. But the true victory, he realized, wasn't in their downfall. It was in his own resilience, in rebuilding a life for himself and his children from the ashes of betrayal. The wheel of justice had come full circle. Chapter 9. Ashes and Embers. 1 year after Boyd's arrest, Leroy stood in his backyard, tending to the grill as Cody and Melissa played with their friends in the sprinkler. The summer evening was perfect, warm air cooling as the sun descended, the scent of charcoal and marinated chicken, children's laughter carrying across the lawn. "Need a hand with those?" Dwayne asked, approaching with 2 beers. Leroy accepted one gratefully. "Almost done." Kids worked up an appetite with all that running around. They stood in companionable silence, watching the children's antics. At 11, Cody was showing signs of the teenager he would soon become, while 9-year-old Melissa remained caught between childhood and the growing awareness of adolescence. "You've done a good job with them," Dwayne observed. "After everything they've been through." Leroy nodded, acknowledging the compliment. The past year had brought significant changes. Boyd had pleaded guilty to attempted murder and weapons charges, receiving a 25-year sentence with no possibility of parole for at least 18 years. The plea deal had spared everyone the trauma of a trial. Vanessa had indeed moved back to the area, finding work as an office manager at a dental practice. True to her word, she had focused on rebuilding her relationship with the children, never missing a supervised visitation and gradually earning back their trust. 3 months ago, the court had modified the visitation order, removing the supervision requirement while maintaining Leroy's primary custody. It had been his decision not to contest the change, a recognition that despite her failings, Vanessa was still their mother. "Trish says Vanessa's seeing someone new," Dwayne mentioned casually. "Some dentist from her practice. Taking it really slow, apparently." Leroy flipped the chicken, unconcerned. "Good for her. You're not worried about history repeating itself?" Dwayne asked. Leroy shook his head. "Vanessa learned her lesson the hard way. Besides, the custody agreement has safeguards now. No overnight visits with romantic partners while the children are present. No introducing partners to the kids without prior discussion." "And you? Any interest in dating again?" Dwayne pressed. "Renee seems to think highly of you." Leroy smiled slightly. "Renee and I are friends. She's still recovering from her own Boyd experience." "Not everyone is Vanessa or Boyd," Dwayne pointed out. "Some people are actually decent." "I know," Leroy acknowledged. "But I'm focused on the kids right now. They've had enough change and turmoil." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Omar and his wife, bearing side dishes for the barbecue. Soon the backyard was filled with friends, colleagues, and neighbors enjoying the summer evening. Leroy moved among them, the gracious host, but part of him remained detached, observing. He had rebuilt his life piece by piece. A new home, strengthened friendships, career success, and most importantly, a solid foundation with his children. The rage that had driven him to systematically destroy Boyd and Vanessa had burned itself out, leaving behind a cooler, more calculated perspective. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were in bed, Leroy sat alone on the back porch, nursing a final beer. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Opening it, he felt a jolt of surprise. "Thank you for allowing the visitation change. The kids seem happier. I know I don't deserve your consideration, but I appreciate it. V." Leroy stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for them." Her reply came quickly. "I know. That's why you're a better parent than I ever was. I'm trying to learn from your example." Leroy didn't respond, but he didn't delete the message either. It represented something he hadn't expected. Acknowledgement from Vanessa that her betrayal had been wrong, not just because of the consequences she suffered, but because of the pain it caused. The following weekend, when he dropped the children off for their visit with Vanessa, He actually exchanged a few civil words with her. Not friendly, not warm, but not openly hostile either. Cody has a science project due Tuesday, he informed her. He's got the materials, but he'll need to work on it this weekend. Vanessa nodded. I'll make sure he has time. We can work on it together tomorrow. An awkward pause followed. Then Vanessa said, I've been meaning to ask. Melissa's birthday is next month. I know it falls on my weekend, but I was thinking we could do a joint celebration. Something small at the park, maybe? So she doesn't have to choose between us. The old Leroy would have refused outright, seeing it as Vanessa trying to insert herself back into his life. But the man he'd become recognized that this wasn't about him or Vanessa. It was about Melissa. That makes sense, he said finally. Let me know what you're thinking, and we'll coordinate. The relief on Vanessa's face was evident. Thank you. As he drove away, Leroy reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. From the devastating discovery of betrayal to the cold, methodical execution of revenge, and finally to this point. Not forgiveness, never that, but perhaps a kind of detached peace. Boyd remained in prison, his attempts to appeal his sentence denied. According to the last update Leroy had received, he'd become a model prisoner participating in therapy and educational programs. It meant nothing to Leroy. Boyd had made his choices and would live with the consequences for decades to come. Vanessa continued her efforts to rebuild her relationship with the children, accepting the limitations Leroy imposed without complaint. She would never again be the woman he had married, never again hold his trust or affection. But for the children's sake, he could maintain a civil coexistence. That evening, Leroy received an unexpected visitor. Renee Simmons stood on his doorstep, a bottle of wine in hand. Thought you might want some company, she said with a slight smile. The first quiet weekend after the kids start visitation is always the hardest. Leroy raised an eyebrow. Speaking from experience? My daughter visits her father every other weekend, Renee confirmed. 5 years post-divorce, and I still hate the silence when she's gone. He invited her in, appreciating her straightforward manner. They developed an unusual friendship in the aftermath of the Boyd situation. Two people who understood what it meant to be betrayed, to seek justice, and to rebuild. How's the fraud case going? Leroy asked as he poured the wine. Renee shrugged. The judgment is just paper at this point. Boyd has nothing to pay with, and won't for decades. But it was never really about the money. No, Leroy agreed. It was about making sure he couldn't do it again. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Renee spoke again. You know, I admire how you've handled all this. The revenge was thorough. She smiled slightly. But you've moved beyond it. Some people get stuck in that phase, letting the bitterness consume them. Who says I've moved beyond it? Leroy challenged, though without heat. The fact that you're allowing Vanessa more time with the kids, Renee pointed out. The man consumed by revenge wouldn't do that. Leroy considered her words. I haven't forgiven her, if that's what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Renee replied. Just observing that you've prioritized your children's well-being over punishing their mother. That takes strength. Later, after Renee had gone, Leroy found himself reflecting on her observation. Had he moved beyond revenge? The cold satisfaction he'd once felt at Vanessa and Boyd's downfall had faded, replaced by something more complex. Not forgiveness. He would never forgive their betrayal, but perhaps a recognition that continuing to actively punish them served no purpose. The damage had been done. Justice, in its own way, had been served. Boyd would spend decades in prison. Vanessa had lost her marriage, her home, her reputation, and full access to her children. The systematic revenge Leroy had orchestrated had accomplished its purpose. Now, his focus was on building something new from the ashes of betrayal. A life centered on his children, his career, and the relationships with people who had proven their loyalty during the darkest times. The final test came 6 months later, when Vanessa requested a modification to the custody arrangement. She had been offered a significant promotion that would require occasional travel and asked for more flexibility in the visitation schedule. Omar advised against it. We have the upper hand legally. There's no need to accommodate her career advancement. But Leroy found himself considering a different perspective. The promotion means better financial security for the children, he pointed out. And Vanessa has been consistent with visitation, following all the court's guidelines. Are you actually defending her? Omar asked, surprised. No, Leroy said firmly. I'm being practical. The children benefit from her financial stability. And they're older now. Cody's almost 13. They understand the situation better. In the end, Leroy agreed to a modified schedule that allowed for some flexibility while maintaining his primary custody. It wasn't a concession to Vanessa, but a decision made in the best interests of Cody and Melissa. When he informed Vanessa of his decision, she seemed genuinely touched. Thank you, Leroy. This means a lot. Don't mistake this for forgiveness, he said, his voice hard. I will never forgive what you and Boyd did. Never. Vanessa's expression sobered. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. No, you don't, Leroy agreed. But the children deserve parents who can at least be civil to each other. As the years passed, Leroy maintained this position. He never forgave Vanessa's betrayal, never fully trusted her again, never allowed himself to be vulnerable to her manipulation. But for the sake of the children, he established a detached, business-like coexistence. Boyd occasionally sent letters from prison, seeking forgiveness or understanding. Leroy returned them unopened. Some betrayals were beyond redemption, beyond forgiveness. Boyd had tried to steal everything from him, his family, his home, his identity as a father. Such actions could never be forgiven. 5 years after the divorce, at Cody's middle school graduation, Leroy found himself standing next to Vanessa as they watched their son receive an academic achievement award. He's so much like you, Vanessa observed quietly. That same determination, Leroy nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. He's going to do well in high school. A brief, awkward silence followed. Then Vanessa said, I want you to know, I understand now why you did what you did. The revenge, the calculated destruction of Boyd and me. You were protecting